Okay. Waiting for more folks to trickle in. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Colleen Vincent. I am VP of Community for the James Beard Foundation. Welcome to our discussion on gatekeeping and hospitality, hosted by the James Beard Foundation and moderated by Chef JJ. Housekeeping note, if you have questions, we ask you to email them to awards@jamesbeard.org so that we can give them the care and consideration that they need. And just so you know, this conversation will continue on additional platforms, including Chef JJ's appearance on Black Food Folks Instagram Live tomorrow at 2, and on the Welcome Conference, Mr. Guidara's podcast later on this month. So, gatekeeping, which is the activity of controlling and usually limiting general access to something. And in our industry, there is gatekeeping. But who are the gatekeepers? What is their thought process? What happens when people's careers are gate kept? Today, we are going to explore those questions and more with Chef JJ in conversation with Will Guidara. So 2 James Beard Award winners. Chef JJ, as you all know, is the founder of Field Trip Harlem and star of the TV show Just Eats with Chef JJ. He was chef at the highly acclaimed Cecil and Minton. He published his first and James Beard Award-winning book, Harlem to Heaven, in 2018, and currently sits on the James Beard Impact Programs Advisory Committee and on the junior board of the Food Bank of New York City. Will Guidara, best known for his stint at 11 Madison Park, is the former co-owner of the Make It Nice Hospitality Group and co-founder of the Welcome Conference, which is here in New York City and Chicago. He graduated from the School of Hotel Administration at Cornell University, has co-authored 4 cookbooks, and has opened and managed numerous award-winning bars and restaurants to great acclaim. And so we are very pleased to have them here tonight. Later on, you will hear from a host of talented chefs, somms, hospitality professionals, and we look forward to their experiences as well. And now I will turn the floor over to Chef JJ. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Welcome, everybody. Today's conversation is a truly important conversation for me, personally, and from, I believe, for my peers in the industry that look like me. The reason why I asked Will to join me in this conversation is about 3 weeks ago, I received a text message from Will, and he said, JJ, can you jump on the phone with me? I want to discuss with you some things that I'm becoming aware with what's happening in our industry, and where I shouldn't be asking you this, but what can I do? And I have these ideas, and I really want to talk to you about it. This was right after I wrote my op-ed piece for Esquire magazine. And me and Will had a very great, candid conversation about the industry, about where it is, where it needs to go. And I was very grateful to have this conversation with Will. And this is why we're here today. This is why we're sitting here. Will, I think out of anybody in the industry, he is stepping up to have this conversation, to give the insight of his thought process and things he potentially might have done wrong, things he's done right, and to help us have a very comfortable and open conversation. So Will, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, man. I'm excited to be here, and I enjoyed the conversation we had. It's interesting, like as a dining room guy, I've spent my entire career learning there's a few like rules. You don't talk about religion or politics in the dining room. And that's kind of a metaphor. You steer clear of talking about anything that might be uncomfortable, or you steer clear of any conversation that might ruffle feathers. But at the same time, as someone who's managed cultures, dialogue is everything. It's where you explore ideas, it's where you learn, it's where you express vulnerability, and it's where you grow. And I felt that in the conversation we had on the phone. And I think one of the biggest things that a lot of us can do is just have more uncomfortable conversations and create dialogue such that we can learn and grow together.
Correct. We're going to ruffle some feathers today. And listen, I know who you are. A lot of people know who you are, but you've done some great things in your career. Can you just give us a little bit of background of kind of where your career started, and then how you became, you had the best restaurant in the world?
Yeah. So I grew up in the restaurant business. My dad was a restaurateur. He worked in New York City. My dad was my hero growing up. No matter what he did, I would have wanted to do the same thing. Thankfully, the thing that he did, I ended up loving. And it's the only thing I've ever done. Literally, I was a busboy at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse when I was like 15, and I just worked at every great restaurant I could get a job at. I worked at Spago as a busboy and Tribeca Grill. We have that in common as a server. I went to work with Danny Meyer. I went to Cornell. I was an accountant, a purchaser. I opened the restaurants at MoMA and ended up at 11 Madison Park, which I ended up buying from Danny with Daniel. And in addition to opening Nomads and all of that, ultimately made that the #1 restaurant in the world before I ended up selling my interest in the company last year.
Right. So, is it, for Black people in the industry, we want to work underneath the best people just like anybody else. But when we go to, top restaurants in the country or potentially in the world, there's not many of us, or maybe one of us in those restaurants. I believe that there's a lot of people applying for the job, and they're just getting overlooked or not getting the same opportunity as the white guys and girls out there. Can you give me some backstory on this? This is an issue that many of us want to understand, going on in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, in the past few weeks, I mean, you've heard the thing everyone talks about, learning and listening, right? And, at a certain point, it starts to sound cliche, but it's for me, it's learning and listening, and it's also reflecting, because until you can figure out what's transpired to get us here, I don't think you have the ability to figure out what we can do to move forward from here. And so I've thought a lot about this. One of the things I shared with you, well, I'll tell everyone what I shared with you the other day. I think for me, a lot of it is self-perpetuation. Okay, so I'll tell you the story of 11 Madison Park and hiring in the beginning and then rehiring over time. And by the way, to be abundantly clear, this is me acknowledging now how things have worked historically, not in an effort to defend them, but to identify them so that we can change them. When people open a restaurant with an aspiration to become a certain type of restaurant. We didn't open 11 Madison Park from scratch, but we took it over and we had aspirations to make it a 4-star restaurant. And so you start to hire a restaurant full of people. And invariably, like most people, when they're hiring, you put out a Craigslist ad, and you get hundreds of resumes. And the thing that you do first is you try to look on those resumes for people that have worked with the kind of restaurants that you want to emulate. So whether that's people that worked with Charlie Trotter or at French Laundry or Per Se or Danielle or Jean-Georges, you want to hire people that have worked at the 4-star level because, well, let's name it, it makes your job easier. If you have people that already come in with a certain skill set, it's easier to get to where you're trying to go. Now, the reality is that if you look at that group of restaurants, we're mostly white. And so if you're only hiring from a pool of people that have already worked in those restaurants, you're perpetuating the same problem. Then you fast forward a couple of years, and anyone that's opened a restaurant can attest to the fact that 6 months in, 50% of the people that you hired in the beginning are gone. and then you start to rehire people to replace them. But then, listen, I've always, for the last several years, I hire people at the bottom. In the dining room, we hire kitchen servers and we grow them from there. And so where in the beginning of opening a restaurant, experience is everything. Once you have a standard of excellence and a culture of hospitality in place, experience is irrelevant. Now you're just trying to find people that are coming in as a clean slate so you can teach them your approach to what right looks like. But at that point, you're not placing ads as much anymore. Now you're hiring friends of the people that work with you. And again, it becomes self-perpetuating. And so I think a lot of the reason why when you look at, listen, we had a reasonably diverse workforce, but nothing compared to what it should have been. And I think a lot of that has to do with self-perpetuation of a system that's, listen, it's hard to run restaurants.
But in
And
that,
so you,
but at that moment in your career, was the culture different from? Did you change the culture from was the Danny Meyer culture different than the Will Guidara and Daniel culture? Did you look at one point and look around and say, "Oh, why? Look at my staff," or "I only have one or two Black people working in my restaurant"? At one moment did you self-reflect in the moment?
I think the culture of our restaurant was different from every other culture, right? You build yours on a foundation of someone else's and then you make it your own. And so, yeah, it was different and in many ways inspired by the ones that I came up working with. But the honest answer to that is not really. I'll share a story. I think when I grew up, there was a group of us. There were 6 friends, and we were like super, super close. 2 Black guys, 2 Asian guys, 2 white guys. And it wasn't until, and one of the Black guys was named Talik, one of my closest friends. We had all of our biggest childhood experiences together. And it wasn't until a phone call 3 weeks ago when we talked that we had our first conversation about race. And in that conversation, man, it was, I feel closer to him now than I did before. We talked about a lot. But one of the things that was acknowledged was that it never occurred to me that I had 2 Black friends, but it occurred to him all the time that he had 2 white friends. I think a lot of people in my position will say, I don't see color. And that sounds like BS, but in a way, when I'm running a restaurant, listen, in the absence of intentionally pursuing a more diverse workplace, you don't see that it's not as diverse as it should be. And I'll admit that in a pursuit of excellence and accolades and lists and all of this, that pursuing a diverse workplace was not one of the things that I was pursuing. I wanted to encourage a workplace where people of all walks of life and genders and colors and religions would feel comfortable and thrive. But I never pursued having an environment as diverse as the one that I'll pursue going forward from here.
Me and you talked about, I mean, I used to be the guy that said that I don't see color, but I used to say it in a different way, as in I hope, when I'm hiring people, I'm hiring the best possible person. I don't care what color of skin you are, your gender. I want to surround myself with the best people. So that's what I would reference as I don't see color. But me and you talked about other restaurants. When you say you hire from your peers, and you keep the cycle going from your peers or from the people that are working there recommending people, the cycle of fine dining is truly a white space.
Yes.
It isn't a space that has many Black people in it at all. We could probably name the Black people that have come out of the fine dining white kitchens and that have fought to stay through those kitchens because of what they went through. And the reason why I bring this up is that New York is one of the most diverse places in the world. And how can fine dining kitchens not be just as diverse, or not just kitchens, restaurants, the staff look like New York City across the playing field. Now, your restaurant might have been more diverse than Thomas Keller's or Danielle's or John George or a bunch of the others, but still the lineage is it's not there. So you're self-reflecting, but why? Can you help me understand why are we not seeing, especially in New York, one of the most diverse places, that it doesn't reflect what society looks like?
I mean, I think it has to do with being passive about something versus being active about something. This is something that Colleen said the other day, which really rung true with me. Okay, there are people that are actively racist, right? They're just bad people.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a lot of people that are passive, meaning they're not actively racist. They're just not actively trying to change what's happening. I think listen, it's like when a record is skipping, you need to go over to the record player and you need to lift the needle off the record and you need to fix it. It's not going to automatically fix itself.
Correct.
And so we've been in a feedback loop where, to your point, fine dining is largely white. It doesn't just become diverse unless someone actually works really, really hard to change that. Because to the thing I was saying before, you're going to hire people that have worked at the level you're aspiring to be at. And unless you say, you know what, listen, one of the things that we've always tried to do is to create culture between the kitchen and the dining room, where people in the kitchen informed what happened in the dining room and vice versa. That's a harder thing to create. There's an inherent tension between the people that cook the food and those that serve it. Tension is a beautiful thing. And I pursued and embraced tension in that way, but not necessarily in as many other ways. Rather than making it easier by hiring people that had worked to the level I aspired to be at. Listen, like, you need to know what your superpowers are. I'm a good teacher. We said this the other day. If every restaurant just added enough budget on the front end to add through 3 weeks of training before they opened, you don't need to hire people that have already worked at that level. You can go out and find just awesome people and teach them what they need to know from the ground up. And I think it's because a lot of people haven't been willing to do that work.
And I would say, I mean, the biggest call out for me is the mentorship, right? I'm not seeing mentorship from the fine dining space into people that don't look like the fine dining space, especially when people aren't coming from 4-star and 3-star restaurants, right? There's a lot of people that worked. I mean, you worked at Tribeca Grill. I worked at Tribeca Grill. You know, that restaurant strive for greatness every day in a very different capacity. And there's a lot of young talent that comes from those sectors that want to be around greatness. Listen, I'm not going to take what you have done. You've developed a great restaurant, great hospitality. What I consider is the pinnacle. But how can we start to mentor in your restaurants that want to work in your restaurants, especially if we know they're not coming from 3 and 4-star places, right? How do we take them from a 2 or 1-star place that might have a little bit more experience than somebody that just worked Kami at Danielle? I mean, it's the truth.
I mean, there's this guy named Malcolm Knapp. He was an old school restaurant guy way back in the day. And he had this famous quote. He said, "The restaurant business is simple, but simple is hard." And I think that somehow applies to this. Like, the answer is simple, but simple is hard. Like, it's not hard to mentor people if you're willing to invest the time and the energy and put in the work. In the same way that I think that the kitchen informing the way food is served and the dining room informing the way that food is cooked is a beautiful thing. The more people from the more different backgrounds that are involved in the collaborative process of creating a magical world, and that's what I believe restaurants are, the better that world is going to be. But it might take more time to get someone up to speed if they haven't done it before.
But hold on, you're a Cornell guy, and there's a lot of black kids at Cornell going through the hospitality program. How do we grab them? Why didn't you grab any of them? Why aren't we seeing other people grab them? I mean, I go back to Morgan Tucker, right? We all know Morgan Tucker. She has a very diverse team at Singer, right? And most of those kids are from Cornell.
Yeah, Cornell's a tough one because you graduate from Cornell and you think you should be the CEO of a company, and very few people from Cornell want to be a food runner at a restaurant. I understand your point, but I don't think it's Cornell. I think it's like, for me, it's CCAP. For me, it's just going out. Like, listen, I've been blessed for a long time in that I haven't had to do any recruiting at our restaurants. People come and want to work for us, and normally they're friends of the people that already work for us. It goes back to my point. It's self-perpetuating. It's like any time that you're not actively going out and pursuing something, you end up with what's naturally in front of you. And I guess my entire thing, the simple part, is go out there and find great people that want to learn. But it makes it harder. And it needs to be something
nobody wants to do the work, right? I was going to say, if the white gatekeepers don't want to do the work to help foster the system. I mean, I have to think back to Paul Bocuse, right? His kitchen was white men, his whole career, not even women. So he cultivated the system, right? He cultivated what was right and wrong, or what he believed was right and wrong, to trickle down into our culinary atmosphere. He doesn't have any black men working in his kitchen. He doesn't have any black women. So besides self-reflecting, what can you say to your peers that you want to see change? And then we'll start talking about the Welcome Conference, where you started to take some stance on change there.
I mean, listen, so this is what I would say. And I think you need a name where you've gone wrong in order to refocus on how you can do right. I'm a super intentional person. Every year in every one of my restaurants, we had a mission statement and we had strategies in order to help us achieve that mission statement. When I was a kid, my dad gave me a plaque that said, "What would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail?" His whole entire idea was be like really vocal about the things that you want to accomplish and do whatever it takes to accomplish them. And we did that for years. And we had articulated goals as a company about, okay, we are going to whatever, this, Zagat, this, Open Table, we're going to do this with hospitality, this with excellence. We want to be the #1 restaurant in the world. Jay-Z had this thing in his book. He said, you can talk things into existence. If you don't have the conviction to say something out loud, you're never going to accomplish it. Never once. And I'll just own this. On any of those lists, did I ever write anything down about diversity? The biggest thing, anyone in our business, nothing about success in the restaurant business makes sense. None of us should ever succeed at anything in the restaurant business. The cards are stacked against us. The only way any of us do anything is by sheer force of will. Like, we just decide with every ounce of our being that it's important enough to us that we're going to put in the work to make it happen. And so I think like when people are coming up with their mission statements and with a list of things that they're dead set on accomplishing, it just needs to be one of those. And listen, specific actionable stuff for me, because that's the way I think, is when I open a restaurant next, I don't care about experience. I'm hiring the right people, and I'm making sure that I'm not only hiring good people that I get along with and see myself in, but I'm hiring good people who maybe other people weren't necessarily ready to give a chance to, because I believe that the work we do today informs what can happen in 10 years, 20 years,
And
30
listen,
years.
a lot of the guys and the girls that work for me are people that don't get chances in other restaurants, which is really sad to see because a lot of them have more talent than me, cook better than I cook, and have been in Michelin star restaurants, which are some of the panelists that we have today. But Will, you have been self-reflecting,
Wait, let me
and
just say one more
oh,
thing
go
though.
ahead.
I want to say one more thing. You build a restaurant in New York City, you're going to spend anywhere from $2 million to $10 million to build a restaurant, 500 grand to $20 million, right? Like it costs a lot of money. If you add another $10,000, and that's generous, and you can add 2 more weeks of training such that you can invest in every single person that wants to join your team that would really add a meaningful role to what you're trying to create, that's a small investment considering all the money you're putting into it. And I don't mean to like make it about money and make it technical, but in reality, it's a business. You need to talk about it. And I feel like that's worth so much more than the amount of money you're spending. That's like one of the first things. And then the second thing is hiring people should not be easy. And you need to not only hire the people that are a part of the community that you've already employed, but you need to go out beyond and find people.
I mean, listen, you brought up the money thing, uh, which is the one thing that is very hard for my community is to raise money. And I'll use my personal experience in raising money. Um, people told me that I couldn't raise more than $500,000. And you're talking about 2 million, 10 million for field trip. And I let people convince me that $500,000 was my ceiling. And um, and that's how I started Field Trip, was with $500,000. I wish I had 1.2 million. I wish I had 2 million. I wish I had 10 million. Now is a different story. But that goes back to, and when you say 2 million or 10 million, you have the access, you have the network, you have the friends or the family or the Rolodex. Somebody gave you the Rolodex to call people. For us in our community, we don't have the Rolodex. Luckily enough, I worked for a gentleman named, Dick Parsons, who's CEO of Time Warner and Citibank, and Alexander Smalls, who had the Rolodex that taught me the way. And that was the first restaurant I ever had to own the helm from two black men. But there's a lot of people that look like me that don't have the Rolodex. So for them, $10,000 could be their pop-up. Will, $20,000 could be the start of a bottling of a hot sauce company. So what advice can you give to people that are watching us, that are out there trying to raise money, that are black and brown, that don't know where to start? Because when you said $2 and $10 million, you said it very lightly, like 2, 10, because you truly have the access to it, and you, especially when you had Nomad and 11 Madison Park, your investors there are some of the richest people in the country. How can people get to know those people or reach out to those people?
It's a hard question. I mean, I think, listen, raising money the first time I raised money was also hard. And when I think about how hard it was for me and how much rejection I experienced before I finally got someone to say yes, I can only imagine how much exponentially more difficult it can be for people from different places. I get that. I mean, listen, there's a part of it that's that's shameless, right? And like, I think any ally, what I think the most beautiful part about what's happening in the world right now, in spite of all the loss and the tragedy and the discomfort, and is that people are starting to put their money where their mouths are. And listen, people know you. People know me through you. People know other people through me and you. And this is the advice I've always given to a lot of people, but it's never felt more appropriate to give than right now. Like, anyone that you know, there's no shame in asking for help, and people want to help. I think right now, like, everyone's trying to figure out how they can, in their own small way, impact change, such that the industry we rebuild on the other side of this is a better industry than the one we set out to rebuild in the first place. But I'll tell you, like, when we talk about inclusion and diversity in the restaurants, I think that's also a really big first step, because the more people of color that work in restaurants like 11 Madison Park, the bigger their Rolodexes become.
Okay, we're getting close to the end with me and you, but you know, as we contemplate meaningful change and how we view and experience what fine dining is, how can we move forward with expanding this concept of dining to include food created by Black chefs and Black restaurateurs? How can we get to that space? Because when we look at fine dining restaurants now, there's not many Black people that are running it, owning it, and doing it.
I mean, one of the things that I've been just trying to do a lot, okay, when I picked up the phone to call you, my fear was I didn't want to be one of those white people calling up my Black friend and saying what I should do. That was the last thing I wanted to do. I just wanted to engage in conversation. And I don't mean this, I don't want this to like sound like a platitude, because I don't think it is. Like, I believe that everything starts with relationship. I considered you a friend before this, and I consider you more of a friend now. The chances of us collaborating on something are far greater now than they were a few months ago, not because of what's happening in the world, but because of the depth that our relationship has started to find.
Correct.
These conversations are uncomfortable, and one of my fears is that people are so scared of saying the wrong thing that they don't say anything at all. And I know that even in this conversation today with you, I probably said something wrong, but I'd rather say something wrong than nothing at all. And I just feel like one of the greatest things we can do, Black, white, everything, is to start having conversations, start developing relationships, because when you talk about raising money, it's about relationships. When you talk about who's getting jobs, it's about relationships. And I want people to have the uncomfortable conversations that result in the relationships that we all need to have, such that we can grow as individuals and we can grow as professionals.
But Will, you're an honest and good guy. You know, there's a lot of people out there that don't push people that are in the space to get the next job that doesn't look like them, right? Or they're not putting them in the space. So I know you say relationship. I'm a relationship guy too. Anybody watching here or panelists know that. A lot of people on the panel are on it because of the relationship I've had and or watch their story. But some people don't have that fortune of relationship. I mean, we'll talk to Omar Tate on this panel, who worked for me. He worked for Missy at a Voce, and they had 2 Michelin stars. And he'll talk about his relationship there. Or Justin Gaines working with Thomas Keller at Bouchon, and they told him he should not work at Per Se because Bouchon is a better fit for him. You know, or a person who should be a master sommelier and use every relationship she had to get there, but then somebody held her up because they were mentally, I don't want to curse, but they were mentally screwing with her while she was doing her master som test. So people have used their relationships, but for Black people, the relationships that we have, especially when it comes from a place of, I believe, white fine dining, we get oppressed. or we threaten, or we white people feel threatened because we've come from a sense of a cooking background our whole life. So we typically know how to cook better. And I just wanted to bring that up because I think a lot of people have relationships. For you, a relationship with you is slightly different because you're a good guy, you're honest. And even though you might have said some things wrong, it came from honesty, and I can't take that away from you. But my follow-up question is, how do we keep expanding dining and hospitality? You are the predecessor of Danny Meyer, who is we at one point considered him the king of hospitality, and you have shown that through food. But I believe you're going to show that a little bit more with having a diverse staff. Is that the way? Is having a more diverse staff is showing hospitality because it expands your diners? Is it having? Is it training? What is it?
Well, I'm sorry to I don't mean to interrupt.
You're cool.
What you said just triggered this thing in me. Like, we talk about all the time, what hospitality means is making everyone that walks through the door, and when I say that, I mean the guest, feel a sense of belonging. And isn't that the first step in the people that you ask to join your team? Like, making everyone that joins your team, or everyone that maybe has an aspiration to join your team, feel a sense of belonging, or a chance that they could actually belong. In terms of the relationships, I mean, I guess listen, we talk about everyone on their personal journey, and everyone, I'm talking about white people, having to figure out how to use their platforms to impact change and to reflect on their experience and to figure out where they've not done as well as they could or played the role that they should have played. And maybe if what I'm talking about is relationship, it's about asking people in leadership not to just check boxes and hire some black people just so that no one can say that they're not.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
But maybe what it is asking white people to actually pursue relationships, or white people to pursue relationships with people from the black community in their industry. Because I don't believe that you can actually impact change or help someone unless you actually get to know them. And hiring them into a job is not doing that. It's investing in them. It's becoming a mentor. Even if you aren't their boss, it's just getting to know people. Because we can do the thing I said before, the listening and the learning, but even more importantly than that, we can get to know someone, and in getting to know someone, we can find that we actually have so much in common that we really want to help them and introduce them and open up our Rolodexes and all of the things you're saying. I'm not trying to be cheesy and bringing it back to relationships. I just believe that's such an important part of it, and it's perhaps on who the burden lies. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's just
Call
tough.
me out if I'm on the wrong path.
I just hear the stories of the kitchens and the people that have applied for the jobs and not getting the phone call back, or not telling why. And I mean, for me, I have to go back to this from the beginning and say, for my fine dining call out is, if you're hiring the same wheel of people, the hamster wheel, at one moment, when did you step back and say, hold on here, these are all white people. These are all the white boys. And I know there's culinary schools that have black kids graduating from them, or I know there's black people working at great restaurants like Tribeca Grill. We personally know that they don't work in these restaurants because we all just shift each other around. So I have to say, I hope moving forward, and the reason why I hope is people are bringing back staff because of PPP money, and a refresh. I call the restaurant industry the grand opening, not the reopening. Yeah. And if you're not giving, if you're not fostering, if you're not hiring for your staff to look like the city that you just, or the community you're in, then shame on you, because that means that you don't want a place for all.
Listen,
You want to keep the wheel going.
You've been generous in your words about me today. The fact of the matter is there's no way that I can sit here and say, hey man, I did a great job. And the reason wasn't because I was actively trying not to do a good job, but I wasn't actively enough trying to do a great job. And I don't think anyone can argue that with as much good as there is in our industry, we've failed in a lot of ways. And the only thing that I can do right now is to look forward and hope, because by the way, I think there's a lot of really good people in our industry. And I think my hope is that through dialogue, through conversation, through intention, and through making commitments and setting goals and being intentional about pursuing those goals, that we are in a year in a better place than we are now, and in 2 years in a better place than we are then, and in 3 years in a better place than we are then. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but I do see a lot of young people rising to positions of power in our industry, and I believe that they have an opportunity and a responsibility to impact a ton of positive change.
Well, I'll tell you this: I know Latinos and Black Americans won't, or Africans will not just keep washing dishes or prepping food if there's no room for growth for them, because we all know that's how you get started in the fine dining restaurant. But people want to grow, and people want to grow not just for themselves, but for their families, to let them know that they're doing something really well. But Will, thanks for your time.
Thank you, man.
I hope more people that look like you, that have the power in their positions, start to have dialogue with their staff, or with their friends, with other chefs they potentially don't know, just to keep the conversation going, so that we can be a better industry for all, because our industry touches the world, and who's going to change the world in this moment is going to be people in the food industry. So thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Matt. Thank you, guys.
Hello. Thank you, Chef JJ. That was a very illuminating and informative discussion. Before we get to the second half of our panel, I just want to let everybody know again that this conversation actually came as a result of JJ Johnson and Valerie Wilson, his PR representation, deciding that they wanted to talk about this topic because they felt there was not enough of a voice around this particular topic. And so how this evolved was, Chef JJ talked about a number of people whose stories that he heard and knew about, that he wanted to kind of give surface to and give platform to. And so that informs the second half of our conversation. We have a wonderful panel of talented guests, including Tahiirah Habibi, who is an esteemed sommelier and the founder of Hue Society and a graduate of Penn State University. She has been featured in Ocean Drive, Wine Enthusiast, Upscale, and Imbibe magazines, and recently co-founded the Roots Fund, a nonprofit that will create new educational pathways, financial assistance, and career opportunities for Black and Indigenous people to become successful in the wine industry. Our next guest is Chef Justin Gaines. Chef Justin is an alum of the CIA, chef and proprietor at Gastropub Tap 1918, and chef partner at Lou Reda's, an American table in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. He was also Food Network's Chop Champion in 2010 and a contestant on Beat Bobby Flay. Our next guest is Chef Erick Williams. Chef Williams is the owner and chef at the acclaimed Virtue Restaurant and Bar in Chicago. And in 2019, he was a featured speaker at the Philly Chef Conference and named a Smith Symposium Fellow by the Southern Foodways Alliance. He is also an active member in Chicago's Lawndale community in which he resides. Our next guest is Chef Omar Tate, whose concept Honeysuckle Projects represents the evolution of food and culture of the Black experience in America. He previously worked at Avoce, Fork, Meadowsweet, Runner and Stone, Russet, and Henry. He is always looking to combine his work as a chef with history and various forms of art, particularly poetry, to tell great stories. And our last but not least guest is Chef Enrika Williams. Chef Enrika is the chef owner of Fauna Foodworks, which was formerly a dining concept at Cultivation Food Hall in Jackson, Mississippi, but has now since refocused as an abstract reimagined culinary lab, which produces thoughtful ingredient-driven cuisine. And she graduated from the Art Institute of Atlanta. And now Chef JJ will be in conversation with his peers, very much informed by his previous conversation. And Chef JJ, again, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Colleen. What's up, everybody? How's everyone doing tonight? Or if you're in a different part of the country today, I hope everybody's family is safe and well. I'm going to start with Tahiirah because I know her because she dined at the Henry. I met her through a dear friend of mine who's the head of diversity and inclusion at Gallo Wine. But I never knew your story. I never knew what you went through. You never shared it with us. That night was just celebration. And when I heard your story, I was truly hurt. So can you just give a little bit of background of who you are, what you do, and what you went through through gatekeeping in this industry?
I'm from North Philly, so we can start gatekeeping there. I see Omar, and I started my wine journey in Philadelphia through the Philadelphia School of Wine, the Wine School of Philadelphia, and my aspiration during that time 9 years ago was to become the first Black woman to become a master sommelier, because there was not one at the time. I didn't know any Black women who were somms at the time. And, I felt like this was something that my community could really rally around. And, it was a big goal for me. And I studied and I went to school and all these things. And when we got to the point where it was time for me to take my test, to keep a very long story short, it was a very cold space going into it. And, I think everybody on this panel kind of knows that feeling of being the only person of color in a space. And so you automatically have to get your mind right with that. And then you're thinking about, a test that is projected to be like your only path of glory, right? So at the time, CMS was the pinnacle of the wine industry. And so you're looking at it and you're like, okay, this is what I have to do to be considered, as a Black person, because there aren't a lot of Black people in this space. I have to get through this. I have to ace this. I have to continue to climb through this particular system to become somebody and be respected. But when I got to the test, I flew from Miami, where I was living at the time, to New York. It's a 2-day test. And their rules were, as they were laying them out, you had to call them master in order to speak, to ask a question, to speak, to ask anything. And I was kind of like, yeah, no, that's a hard no for me. But I didn't think that, I figured that they had not been used to having Black bodies in that space, because again, this was 9 years ago. It was not a large Black wine population at that time. And, I figured, well, if I raise my hand, they're not going to say that to me, not because, oh, I think I'm special or better than the other candidates, but because, are you kidding me? And so I raised my hand and it happened. And I was just so hurt in that moment, because it wasn't just me whose dream was dying at that point. You know, there were, I don't know how many other people had gone through this system or who had experienced something similar to this, where it was a hard stop in the beginning. And it's like, even if the next day it had been addressed as, okay, you know, we shouldn't have said that, or, you know, we're going to adjust this, but it wasn't. And that just let me know that they did not see me. The fact that I raised my hand and you still felt like we need to tell this Black student who is trying to learn, because that is what this is all supposed to be about. This is why we're paying you our money. This is why we're, you know, coming and spending all of this time to learn. And you're going to stop me because I don't want to call you master. There's a lot of issues with that. And as an institution, somebody in that space, and if it's 4 instructors, somebody in that space should have been like, you know, did you notice the Black girl? But the fact that none of them even noticed that I, you know, raised my hand and that I went to speak and that I didn't speak because I wasn't saying that. And it lasted for 2 days. That was an issue for me. And I just was not going to associate my value with something that was just so inhumane, in the sense that you didn't even notice. Like, the fact that it's wrong that you're saying this, but the fact you didn't even notice that I tried to speak and you didn't, nothing came of that was a big issue for me. And I was just like, this is not who I am. This is not, I don't need this. I know my, am I allowed to cuss? I know my stuff. And I can make a career for myself outside of this, and I did. And, you know, but it wasn't the easiest thing, but it wasn't going to be something that I was going to continue through that path, especially knowing the next level of the test is service. So you have to serve them. And I wasn't going to serve anybody and call them master. So that was the end of the test.
I would have left too. I might have flipped the table over. Be honest, if you know me, but I definitely would have written them, or but it's a shame to know that nobody took into account history. That was a very privileged moment for them to say, well, she's the only one, and what can we do? Justin, through your career, have you seen, you've been around for a while, we went to culinary school together, Justin, you know, have you seen things of this nature in the kitchen? You know, you worked at Thomas. We talked about a story as they convinced you not to take a job at Per Se. It was better to work at Bouchon. You know, walk me through some of the things that happened in your career. Oh, he must have muted himself. Justin, you there?
Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Anyway, first, hello everybody. Nice to meet you all. I think the way JJ's phrasing it, when I went to Bouchon and I actually came back from Alabama. I spent 2 years in Montgomery, helped someone open a restaurant, and I felt myself slowing down, and I wanted to get back to a little bit more of a push. But I said I would only work for myself. I would only work for a name in the industry. And it actually got narrowed down to Marcus Samuelson, who was opening Red Rooster at the time, and Thomas Keller. And just based off of how the staging went was the reason why I went with Keller versus Marcus Samuelson. No disrespect to him, a lot of respect for him too, what he's done and what he's continued to do. But when I went, everybody had, from what I was told, everybody had to call the French Laundry, the HR, to go to Per Se, because it started with the French Laundry. And the woman there told me I could interview with the chef de cuisine of Bouchon in New York, which they have 3 locations now. And she said she can interview for Per Se. Great. Went for the interview, and it was basically all for Bouchon. And then the woman, who was actually a CIA graduate, gave me the interview. We had a good time. We talked about our history and who we were, where we came from. We found out we had a lot in common and why we both went to CIA and then both ended up at Thomas Keller. And she looked at my resume and said, you moved around a lot. I said, yeah, I helped a lot of people open restaurants. And she said to me, you know what? I could give you an interview for Per Se, but I think you coming to Bouchon would be better because you would understand restaurant opening experience, understand the pressure, and it would be a good fit for you right now. And then she said, because we're going to be opening Rockefeller Center, Thomas Keller's next location, and she said I could use somebody like you to really be a strength. And then I said, well, would that lead to per se? She said, yeah, definitely. She was like, you do that, you can go up and work at per se afterwards. She said, I know the chef de cuisine who was Eli at the time. And I think Eli might be Middle Eastern, if I'm correct. But anyway, did Bouchon, Time Warner, did Rockefeller Center. And when it was time to go up to per se, it wasn't as well received. And I had already staged up there many times. All the sous chefs and chef de cuisine told me I could come when I want. I just needed the blessing from Bouchon, and I didn't necessarily get that. And then I was told that from someone I won't name because the industry is small, but they told me that they got you. And I said, even they got you. He said they do that to everybody. They hold the apple in front of you per se, but then they put you where you want to be or where they want you to be, and it happened to be Bouchon. And I said, really? Like, yeah. He was like, we talk about you behind your back all the time. They were like, why are you even here? Like, you're stronger than this. And I'm like, man, I got. And, you can take it as, a punch or in the gut, but I looked at the experience of it. I spent a lot of time up in per se. If I wasn't prepping or being a commie, I did a lot of watching and learning and talking with the chefs and building some relationships. So it was still good. And as far as the diversity up there, I think it was a little bit more diverse than I thought. Not so much brothers and sisters, but I did see a lot of Asian culture, a couple Latinos, people for the most part in prominent positions, for the most part white, but there's now chef de cuisine who is what they call a SAS, I think. This guy was, I think he's from either Korea or China. His name is Corey Chow. And I talked to him many times, and he's now the chef de cuisine. He's very good and very quiet, and I watched him work and talk with him and Chef Ross, who's from England, and he's now in the Bouchon Bistro in Yountville. So I did bridge a lot of relationships and people that I talk to still to this day from working there. I would have rather went to per se first, and I kind of got hooked and sent another way, but you just keep on pushing. And from there, working at Thomas Keller got me a lot of stages in a lot of other Michelin star restaurants in the city, because when they heard I was there, like JJ was talking about with Will, everyone was willing to open the door. And, before I left the city, I had other offers to join other Michelin star kitchens because of that Thomas Keller name. I used to stage on my day off for free all the time.
And you have 2 restaurants in North Carolina now, right, Justin?
Yeah, I have a gastropub here. My partner is a gentleman I've known for about 11 years now. We met in Alabama through a mutual consultant, opened an Italian bistro, New York style, in Montgomery, out of all places. It's still open a decade later. And this gentleman happened to be from Outback, and he's now my partner now. His name is Reda, and I'm the chef partner to his place. We opened that 7 years ago. And then some investors from the other side of town doing hundreds of millions of dollars of a redevelopment historical area were eating lunch at Lou's and said, hey, come look at this 100-year-old house, which I'm sitting in the office of now upstairs. And they told us the history, what they wanted to do over here. They were basing it around beer and microbrewing. And they said, what could you guys do with this house? So we walked around, looked, and we said, I guess it's a tavern or a gastropub. And then that's what we built, TAP, in 1918. We built a gastropub in a 100-year-old house.
Nice. Enrika, you work with Richard Blaze, right?
I did. I worked with Richard Blaze shortly after his appearance on Top Chef. Tom Catherall had a restaurant group in Atlanta called, well, when I was there, it was called Posh. And so he decided to change the concept to Home, which was Southern food with a lot of the molecular gastronomy, but using the traditional Southern food. So he came on as the chef, and I was still at Posh, and the other chefs left, so I was still there. So I had an opportunity to work with him during his tenure there at the restaurant.
What was your position there?
And my position was I was a line cook. I actually had 2 jobs at the time. So when I was working at Posh Home was my play job, and my real job was Intercontinental Buckhead, where I worked in the pastry department. I needed something to pay my bills. That didn't work so well being in Atlanta, but working at Posh, it gave me the opportunity to learn a lot more technique, see more ingredients, and it was just more intimate for me to work there.
And then you
So
did some time at Emerald's too, right?
yeah, so I worked at Emerald's right out of culinary school. I moved to Atlanta from Jackson, Mississippi in 2000. And while I was in culinary school, my first job was at America's Mart, downtown Atlanta. This is like a trading center. And so I worked through Aramark, and I was making soup and I was prepping. And Emerald's opened in Atlanta around 2004. And I went and interviewed, and I was hired, and the process was like a casting call for a reality TV show. Like the lines were down the block. I think the experience with working at Emerald's, working with Emerald, was just as important and vital and necessary as me going to culinary school. I'd never seen such ingredients being used, the attention to the detail. So as I was working at Emerald as a student, I did a lot of prep work, but I moved around a lot. So I got to see.
What was the culture like in these restaurants? Because, I'm mentioning these restaurants in the South. You work with Sean Brock, you work with Emerald, you work with Richard Blaze. This is like, there's no Michelin star restaurants. There's none of that in the South, right? I would say Sean Brock, McGrady's are the closest. So what was the culture like? Who was in the kitchen? Give us some of that background.
So the culture in Atlanta was, it's familiar to me in the climate that I grew up in and kind of understanding.
What does that mean? What is the climate that you grew up in? You were around Black people?
This is a very interesting thing. So I grew up around Black people. I grew up around Black people always doing things. I grew up around Black people making things happen, creating things, and shaking shit up. I grew up in that. So you go from that, and then you are in restaurants where you are invisibly seen, and the context is either you slept with someone, they're filling a quota, or you should just know your place and just be quiet. So my thing being who I am, which is Southern country and rural, I had to go in and let people know who I was. In that sense, what that means to me is I actually learned that from 2 Puerto Rican chefs who I consider to be mentors to me. They were just like, you're gonna have to go into these kitchens and let people know that you are that bitch. Sorry.
But hold on.
Yeah.
And now I was hoping you wouldn't say that. I was hoping you wouldn't say that bitch.
But I got it, because all of the kitchens that I was in, I was either the only woman or the only woman and person of color. And I was
So you feel 2 quotas.
I feel 2 quotas, and then also I was intimidated by that. I didn't see anybody else that I could relate to. I didn't see anybody else that I could talk to. If there was a problem, an HR problem, a harassment problem, I didn't want to stir or shift anything. So a lot of that stuff I internalized. So my chef mentors, Mel and Vince, told me, you are going to have to go in and take what you want. You're going to have to do that. And so it pulled out of me the things that I grew up in, but the conditioning that I shrunk myself so small to fit into these restaurants because of the opportunity that I was given, because of the opportunity to be in these spaces.
But you hear a lot of people, that Black people in the industry, talk about working in these high pressure restaurants, that we come down with mental health.
Oh yeah.
Alcoholism, drugism, because we have nobody to go to, because if we do go to somebody, we might lose our job. I'm gonna pivot to Omar real quick. Omar worked in, you know, a couple of great restaurants. He worked with a master baker. Omar worked with me at the Henry. Omar, when you worked in these kitchens, especially you worked at a Voce, right?
Okay.
I think you're muted. This is a tricky program the James Beard Foundation set us up with. I'm gonna come back to you. You figured out. Hold that. I'm gonna come back to you, Erick. I wanted to transition, and I'm gonna come back. Omar, are you good? No, Omar's still muted. Erick, you have a restaurant in Chicago. It's becoming, you know, a renowned restaurant. It's not typically in a place that most people would go and dine. And when I was talking to Will Guidara about capital and money, would you, if you had enough money, would you put your restaurant in the West Loop?
No, I wouldn't have. My situation is a little unique. I've been doing this for a little while, and at some point, I felt like it was time for me to just do exactly what I wanted to do. And so the reason why we're on the south side of Chicago has a lot of purpose for myself and for my team. My entire management team that worked with me at a restaurant by the name of MK for many years moved to the area near our restaurant because we all wanted to be able to commute. And so, as most people know, Chicago South Side gets a bad rap. It's often talked about as the place that's the murder capital of the world, which is untrue. And it would make people believe that it's too dangerous for anything that's worth having to exist. In the midst of the South Side, right in the core of the South Side, is Chicago's wealthiest African American community. It also happens to be home of an Ivy League university, and there's a ton of diversity in the actual community that we're in. So a lot of that was factored into the process of why we wanted to be there, what kind of food we wanted to serve, and how we wanted to best represent ourselves.
And now, you know, you've changed. You know, I listen to white writers tell me, oh man, I went to the South Side to visit Erick's restaurant. For me, you've done the job, but it's also really sad to hear that, right? And I think media plays a big role in this. When we talk about this industry, I hear people tell me, you know, it's quicker to get to Chicago than it is to come to Harlem. And they live on 59th Street. And they got to pass by Harlem to get to the airport, you know? Or as I wrote in my Esquire piece, people get scared to walk in, to come to our communities, but they say they'll come to the South Side. They say they came to Harlem or the Bronx or Mississippi or South Philly, but they just got an Uber. What did you do, Erick, to help change that mindset or that culture? Was it your partners? You know, how did you get media to, how did you break down the media to come eat at your place?
So our focus wasn't the media. Our focus, and it's gonna sound like I'm branding a little bit, but we opened a restaurant named Virtue because we believe in this idea of hospitality and kindness. And there was a lack thereof in restaurants that I was going to. And I recognize that throughout history, throughout our culture, it has been our women that have not just provided the stage for dinner in this country. Our women have fed a good portion of our country either through their hands or by their breasts.
All right.
And so then how do I fit into that space, and how do I take the platform that I have and utilize that, not for the press, not for anybody outside the space, but for the team that we went out and recruited so that others, right, could tell the story. I'm not a young chef, right? And I'm not gonna be on the line 7 nights a week. The idea is we wanted to develop young men and young women to have the opportunity that I got. And that was an opportunity to develop, to understand how cooking could both be effective in your life at work, but also in your life at home. And so we found pathways to translate skills. Many of our people come from hostile environments. A lot of us aren't coming out of suburbs to work in restaurants. And so I recognize that because I'm one of those people. And it was important to me to take those skills that I learned, right? Understanding how to work under pressure, understanding how to think on my feet. Those are skills that are applicable in the streets. They're applicable in boardrooms. And so we have all these young folk that are inundated with this narrative or this rhetoric around trauma because of what's going on in our communities. But the reality is there's always been a negative narrative going on in our communities, dating all the way back to the plantation. As much as we want to talk about this idea of what we've seen and what we've experienced and what we're tired of, we can't be any tireder than our ancestors. And so we channel that energy in a way that's palatable, all pun intended. And we want people to ingest this high level of dignity, this high level of integrity. And as people saw it happening in this environment that they couldn't imagine it happening, it just took. But it was not our intention. Our intention was solely to get in and do what we understood how to best do and convey that message in a way that felt organic and natural to us.
Well, listen, you're doing an amazing job. You're doing an amazing job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Omar, you got your
mic? This last thing.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Eric. Go ahead. Say that last thing.
No problem. So I was listening to someone talk the other day about musicians. And our favorite musicians sing a song to someone else. We happen to be bystanders. We happen to be onlookers on the song that they're singing to the particular person. But when music is performed at a high level, it exudes so much passion that we all get sucked in. Luther Vandross is a great example. Luther wasn't singing to any of us. But if you grew up listening to Luther, there's a moment where you feel like, like Luther is either giving game to the brothers or definitely, right, wooing away the women. And so we have the opportunity and the capacity to do that with food. And we also have the capacity to do that by our presence. And so that's what we channel.
Thank you. Omar, you got your mic? No, Omar don't. Omar, you're still muted. It's in the right hand on the top corner. You'll see it by the orange arrow. Look like a little microphone. Well, so listen, I'm moderating this panel. I'm JJ Johnson. But at any moment, anybody could jump in. Don't wait for me. There's keywords that you guys can all reflect on. I'm just here because I want to hear your stories and I want the people to hear your stories and what's going on. Enrika, you said something about that you were contributing to restaurants, but nobody was paying attention to what you were doing. What was your greatest contribution? And then how did that lead to you doing your own stuff?
My greatest contribution is legacy. Like, that's where I come from. Black women, Black Southern rural women have always done and taken care of and fix things and solve problems and feed people and do all of those things. And it was always expected of us, but it was never honored outside of the expectation of that's what we're supposed to do. So for me, the biggest contribution is where I come from, who I come from, and that tenacity and that work ethic that I have with that, and that ties into the creativity and my imagination when I'm putting things out. That same thing forced me to work for myself. I wanted to have my own agency, figuratively and literally, and I wanted to make sure that the stories and the things and the food that I created and the message that I sent out and the voice that I had was controlled by me, because it was always a thing. It was good to have the girl with the nappy hair or the wraps in the kitchen to look inclusive, to look diverse, but when she came to the cutting board with her stuff, it became an issue, and mediocrity was threatened and it was bruised. And I just always told myself, I'm going to bring everything that I have all the time because I'm here. So
But how,
even
that's what kills me is like, how can it be bruised? We've been cooking our whole lives. Our grandmother's been cooking. Our auntie's been cooking.
well, for being a Black woman, first of all, growing up in the South, being a Black woman in this industry, being a Black woman in the good old boys club in Mississippi, and that is just pervasive throughout the country. You have to understand the code switching that comes with being a Black woman that grew up during the time that I did, and understanding the legacy and understanding my grandmamas and my mamas and aunts and what they went through, and also the people that I admire and that I respect, and the stuff that I got to do. See, I have stuff to do, and the thing that I feel is it's always expected for us to fix, but we're never given the respect and honor due of what we have always done. And so what comes into play is, I'm going to say it, the white boys in the kitchens, they are threatened by that. That bruises their mediocre skills. And so what that has to do for me is like, you cannot possibly show me up. I cannot have you showing everyone how capable you are and maybe more qualified than you are. So I have to do things subconsciously. I have to do things microaggressively. I have to do things, messing with your money and your potential to move up, to make me feel better, me being the white man or the white whatever, feel better about your presence. That is a threat. And so instead of, I'm animated because, I'm here and I'm in this amazing climate. We are in a space in Mississippi where so much is shifting, so much is happening. And it's just like, in the immortal words of the great prophet Andre 3000, the South has got something to say. And that is exactly how I feel in this space.
Oh God, the South got something to say.
In this industry, this is how I feel in every fucking thing I do. Like, the playtime is over. I don't care about mediocre white men. I don't care about mediocre feelings. Bring your shit, because I always have.
Enrika, I want to throw this to Justin and Eric and everybody. Do you feel that's why there's not Black people in fine dining kitchens? Because white men are scared about us showing their investors that we can cook better and do better?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Just chiming in off of what Eric was saying about the South Side of Chicago, where you're at. When JJ knows this because we go back 20 years. I did my externship in New Orleans at the Marriott Hotel, and at that time, New Orleans was considered a murder capital. But all the places I went to eat and walk, they weren't always the greatest area, and I saw diversity. And I know food critics were there. Some of the most famous restaurants that whether it be from Emerald's to the Brennan family, and what's that gentleman that went to CIA? I forgot his name. He's got a big restaurant down there. But either way, those were in tougher areas too. But we all know when we go to eat, we go out to eat. So whether the area is tough or it's clean or whatever, if the food is good and the service is good, we're gonna make a way there. And so is a food critic. So I like what you're doing as far as dispelling, I'm not going to go to this known area over here because that's where it's predicted and that's where I should go. I'm going to put it here because of the environment that it's in, and it's going to bring those opportunities. And I hear Enrika talking about her battles, and I think that's very similar for not just Black culture, a lot of cultures, but for the most part, us. But when you talk about systematic racism and discrediting and beatdowns, I mean, everybody can sit right here, right now, and watch a commercial. And I've always laughed, even before I knew I wanted to be the chef I am now. How are you showing me a commercial on fried chicken, but it's some white guy? How is a white guy known for KFC fried chicken? That's impossible to me. I don't know how y'all feel, but that recipe came from somewhere else and it was stolen. And that person gets the credit. And then I talked with JJ, someone he's worked under, Alexander Smalls, and we've had conversations over the years. You look at barbecue in this country, barbecue in general, which came from the Caribbean. But when you see an article in the New York Times or Garden and Gun or Town and Country, it's always a pale face talking about barbecue, but I've been to Dallas, New Orleans. JJ knows I've been all over the country, Miami. Anytime I look in the kitchens, there's brothers in the kitchens or Latinos cooking that barbecue, but it's a different space. And I'm like, I've never even heard of you, but I know that person right there is making that roast pig, ribs, or beef shoulder, or whatever it is, tastes good. Where's the recognition? And if you look at our style of cuisine, you know that barbecue is our cuisine because it was created from throwaway meats. That's all we had. So pickling, smoking, and curing and pit fires, we know that goes all the way back to Africa, and you can look at it. And Spain had something to do with that too. So there's always a lack of recognition that we always have to fight for. But then you see someone else get the credit, and then you're like, I was in that kitchen the whole damn time.
Well, I mean, listen, I got Omar. I heard him. I think I heard his voice come through. Omar's doing something, Justin, as you talk about that. He's been using, words, poetry to express African-American stories with his food so people can know where the food comes from. Omar, can you tell me a little bit about, what you've been doing, why you've been doing it, and kind of, you got to jump in here, where some of those kitchens you've been in, because you worked in them. We've talked about these things in the kitchens we've worked in together.
Yeah, well, everybody can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, but y'all got me out here feeling like Teddy Riley. Listen, so, you asked me earlier, what happened. It's kind of going to piggyback off of what Justin is saying here, but the systemic racism is the biggest issue that I see facing restaurants right now. They're not just an institution; they're a byproduct of an institution that already exists. That's called capitalism. And so, capitalism being in this country being built upon the backs of Black Americans. When I walked into a Voce, my first encounter in the kitchen, I was introduced. I had a knife roll in my hand, and I was introduced to the dish station because they thought I was a Haitian dishwasher. So, the idea. Like the limited possibility of what I was capable of was already set in stone by everyone who worked there, who had a position of power to bring me into a space. And so that almost has nothing to do with the people who own the space and has more to do under the system that the restaurant space operates under. Like fine dining, the conversation around fine dining to me is more of like, why is it a construct of power? Like if we look at the restaurants that a lot of people own, there's way more diversity in like what we would consider a lower class, fast casual restaurant. If you go into these spaces, like even before you get to like Chipotle, for example, has more people of color working in there in positions of power than a per se would ever have, because that idea of power is not in the hands of Chipotle. Chipotle is trying to reach the people, trying to reach the masses of people. What I try to do with Honeysuckle is talk about the people first. If you look at restaurants, the word restaurant literally goes back to restore the people who were hungry, and so that the people who were serving those people could be restored for those people. So, as we move forward in this industry, and I've worked with Honeysuckle, putting people first and that story first to remind people of the people who created the food and the systems that we often ignore is the driving engine, and us being Black people, that driving engine behind what I do. So the poetry, the art, the food, all of that is articulating that idea that like the food is the least important part, and the ones who are the ones who are represented through that food matter the most. And Chef Erick, I mean, listening to how you operate with virtue, like that is, to me, that's, if restaurants are going to continue to exist in the structure that they do, like that's the model. JJ was talking about mentorship. It's not just about mentorship. It's about empowerment. That's like the word that I got after hearing you describe how virtue operates. It's about empowerment. I wasn't looking for mentorship when I went to a Voce. I already had credentials. I already worked in the best restaurants in Philadelphia. I was coming to New York City. I was hired by the chef de cuisine, and the person that met me at the door didn't know who I was. That's a problem. That's a problem. I had a knife roll in my hand. They put off the dishwasher. That's a problem.
That's a
so
problem.
They can't even they're not recognizing the cues. It's clearly about my skin color and what that represents to them in terms of like possibility.
Well, it's like the Black guy and the white guy standing in the restaurant. Who do people talk to first? They talk to
Right.
the white guy because they believe he's the owner, you know?
Right.
It happens all the time. It happens to all of us here. You know, I would say, you know, I think the biggest experience that I went through was when I was a partner at the Henry, and there was like 1 or 2 weeks where we started to see our sales trickle down a little bit. And the corporate white chef from the big operating restaurant group, Omar, could chime in on this one. He was on the call, said, you know, maybe it's the food. Maybe it's
Yeah.
the food you guys cook. And I was like, what do you mean, you guys? You know?
Right.
What did you
Right.
guys mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a restaurant that was written up in the New York Times. How could it possibly be the food? Your restaurant was the first restaurant that I worked at where like the staff was almost entirely black. I think the kitchen was entirely black outside of the prep staff. You know, I'd never been in that environment before. I'd never felt that scene before in a restaurant. In fact, like as I was coming up as a line cook, I was trying to do my part to make myself not invisible, but like be more just a part of everyone else that was working there. And it was the people who were outside of me, white line cooks, who were making me recognize that I was black by like the jokes that they made or the music that they played when I showed up, or like all sorts of shit like that. And it was the people in power, the managers, the sous chefs, and things like that who allowed that kind of culture to happen. That didn't happen at the Henry. You know, that just didn't. It wasn't even a part of the culture at the Henry. It wasn't a part of the culture at many restaurants that I worked at where they were more diverse. You know, it's again, if we're talking about gatekeeping and fine dining, that just ain't it, man. Like fine dining is
coming to
not
an end. The
the
pandemic
marker.
has checked it. The pandemic has checked fine dining to the fullest. Tahiirah, when you worked at the St. Regis, did people make you feel like you had to act a certain way to be the som? You know, I have a dear friend in the restaurant industry who's a master som who told me when he worked at John George, they told him the only way he can get on the floor is if he acted like them, talked like them, dressed like them. And that was the only way he can get on the floor. And he started to act that way. I see Justin thinking about who that is. You know who that is.
Oh, I already know.
And you know who that is too. But break that down to me.
I think when we're talking about racism, we need to like talk directly to the problem, which is the system. When fine dining was established, it was established on a racist system. It was not established for the inclusion of Black people. It was specifically established for the exclusion of Black people and people of color, yet they benefit off of our creativity, they benefit off of our brains and all the rest of that stuff. And so you cannot address gatekeeping, which is really a euphemism for racism, when you're talking about this, right? And so at St. Regis, no, it's no different. Like, they literally indoctrinate you into this system where it's brainwashing. Like, you have to act a certain way, you have to dress a certain way, you're not allowed to do certain things. And there are literally racist policies written into their HR systems. I remember one time I had braids. I had the second in command tell me, do not come back to work. And I'm telling you, these were neat braids, very cute, in a bun. You know, I even try to follow the rules, which are ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
To work until you take those things out of your hair. You should not have those things in your hair. And I looked at him like, you gotta be kidding me right now. Like, there's nothing wrong with my hair. And so when I wanted to report him and when I wanted to go to HR, my manager specifically told me not to do that I was not allowed to report him, that I couldn't go say anything about that. Like, I was wrong. I was completely in the wrong here. So yes, absolutely, you have to speak a certain way. And then you get your guests who are like, oh my God, you speak so proper. Where are you from? And I'm like, North Philly. And they're like, like, you know, yeah, I'm from the gutter. And guess what? There's so many people like me who are from that space that you created that have made it out of that space into something so brilliant that it's literally mind-blowing for you sitting in this seat right here, sipping on this $300 wine on Tuesday, that you don't even get it. Like, how
Anybody heard
possibly
you
got
said that?
there?
You said
This is
that
absurd.
you created so quickly. I want you to go back to that you were serving them wine that was $300 from a certain place in the world, that they created. And I think that everybody, I want you guys to jump in on this because Erick talks about this, right? That they created, right? They've oppressed these areas. You know, our field trip Harlem is in the highest unemployment sector of New York City. And we have people eating black rice with salmon and peri-peri sauce. So can you go into a little bit more about that?
I mean, if you're thinking about socioeconomics, who created that? When you think about the crack epidemic, when you talk about single parent homes, all of these systems were created. These are all racist systems, and that is how racism lives, through power. So when you take that back to fine dining, no, they don't want your black ass in there because that is a power structure for them. That is an easy, very easy power structure for them, and it's incredibly intimidating. So to try to get into that space, you literally have to convert yourself into this person who they make in whatever that code is at their particular space to even step foot into that door. If you don't look like that gatekeeper at that interview, it's a hard no. If your name is too hard to pronounce, in most instances, that gatekeeper at that HR place, it's a hard no. And so when we're talking about having chefs pick their line, and you're talking about wine directors pick the people who are going to work on the floor for them, we're talking about access, we're talking about economics, because you have to get into those spaces. You had him, he was on here talking about how were choosing people, basically nepotism, going back into that, like, picking the people who and money and capital. But we got to start this conversation at redlining. We can't start this conversation at, this was you didn't get a loan for your restaurant in an expensive space a couple years ago. Why did that happen? Like, you got a 400-year leap ahead of everybody because there were literally systems and laws put into place to make sure that we didn't have these spaces. So,
I got a question. Who, if anybody, put their arm around you or Enrika? Did anybody in the last decade, in your come up, or if longer, did anyone put their arm around you and say, hey, I know it might not be going the way you think, but here, let me show you a different path, or just some kind of vision, or just look at it this way. I know it's hard, but here, this is the way I would go about it. Did anyone do that for you two women?
I don't think that anyone put their arm around me for those reasons. I had a mentor at the St. Regis who happened to be the wine director, and I wanted to learn about wine, and he was willing to teach me about wine. And so I snuggled up under that. But did he come to me like, yo, I want to make this easier on you? No. When I got sent away from tables because I was Black, it was you just kind of deal with it.
Sent away from tables because you were Black?
That still happens to this day. I did an interview with a young Som who works at a country club in Atlanta right now, and it still happens to this day. And I worked at St. Regis, 7-8 years ago. This is not, these things have not changed. It's the same exact system over and over and over again, and they completely annihilate and they silence Black voices or Black and brown voices, which is racism, by saying, hey, the customer comes first. Where do you think that came from? The customer comes first.
I want to piggyback on that real quick before you guys jump in. It's interesting, right? If you're going after the world's 50 best, or you want 3 stars or 2 stars, whatever it is, you have to have French, British people as your captains or your servers serving the food to make sure that critics feel like it is elite. But we've been serving people, we've been the ones laying the foundation. We were the ones cooking and serving and doing things before white people made money off of this industry. And I just wanted to put that out there, as I know everybody about to jump through their screen because you got everybody riled up.
It's always until it's appropriate, right? Sorry.
No, I was just going to piggyback off of Tahiirah's comment about the question from Justin, did someone come and put their arm around me or Tahiirah and say, hey, this is a way to do it? I have to say that the system and the gatekeeping, I think there's this myth that is like these big bad white people that are the gatekeepers. I've seen a lot of gatekeepers that look like me, and look like y'all.
Love being the only Negro in the room.
They do not like the idea sometimes of more of us being in a place. I've always felt very concerned if you are the only person and you are comfortable being the only person in a group. If you're okay with that and you make it hard to be inclusive, I have a problem with that.
But don't you think that's brainwashed? Don't you think we've been brainwashed that we're supposed to be the only?
It's just it's conditioning. That it is such a deep-rooted, deep-seated mindset. It is a survival tactic. It is so many things that we don't even have the space in this year to dissect and talk about why and how we do things that we have been doing for survival and out of necessity and out of because that has just, it's generational inside of us, of our actions and our responses. It's just because that's what we know to do. I have had people in the industry, people that I love, who have always shown me exactly whatever it is that I wanted to be, I can do that. And it's not this we are the world type of visual, but it was a thing of understanding. I know how fucked up this is, and I see what you're doing, and I understand how people are complicit in this. So let me give you some game. Let me let you in on some game on how you can navigate, because that's what you're doing. You're navigating and you're code switching to fit and to save and preserve your sanity, especially as a Black woman. I am not negating, and I'm not saying that the systems and what we work in the industry is not on some bullshit for all marginalized people, indigenous people, all of us, but especially for my experiences, it has always been this space of don't be too much, don't think too much, don't do too much, because you still want to make sure you can come to work and work in a comfortable environment. You don't want to come in making people unsettled or uncomfortable, because, you know, I had a gentleman, we've since rectified the situation, but I remember, so in Mississippi, they celebrate Robert E. Lee's birthday. It's a federal holiday here. And so he decided he wanted to sing how he wished he was in Dixie, hooray, hooray. And again, Omar knows me and he knows how I talk. And so I asked him, the fuck you doing? There's no cotton, there's no Dixie. Now I'm the only on the line.
But you're the only one on the line, right? You're the only one there.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let you know that I will I'm not this confrontational on the line. I'm just like really animated right now because that's coming out. But I had to let him know this is not what we're not going to do. And I was his supervisor. He was a line cook. I was a sous chef. Wow. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like always having to remind people who the fuck you are when people are trying to tell you all the time who the fuck you need to be. And that gets tired. It gets tired. It's exhausting. I have lost colleagues to suicide, too many to name. I have lost colleagues to drugs and alcohol, some who have just burned completely out and they are over this. You know, it is by the grace of God and the ancestors and whatever that I have not sank so low in the weight of all of this stuff all of the time, because this underlying thing is I got shit to do. I'm here for a reason, and my struggle, my story, and my purpose is not one of misery, and is not one of constant downtrodden whatever. I know where I come from. I know who I'm standing on, who helped me to get here, and part of that in what I do is making sure people understand. Especially, I think there is this this concept or this misconception about Mississippi in the Deep South, that we're slow, that we're ignorant, that we're just.
I have a conception. My grandfather's from Mississippi.
You know, that we're not up on game or whatever, but you know, Mississippi is the hotbed for change, revolution, and anything that has to do with anything that is worth anything in this country has had its origins in some way here. And I've just always been emphatically proud to represent that in the kitchen and in my spaces, because it's so nuanced, but it's such an honor and it's such pride. Like
I wanted to jump in here real quick because we got about 10 minutes left, and I have a couple of questions from people that have joined us. This one is for Erick. How can we reimagine the industry to be more supportive of POC leadership?
We can imagine the industry being more supportive of leadership by people of color as we continue to insist that our leadership engage more often in collective conversations and collaborative efforts. When we think about the founders of our country, that wasn't singular, that was plural. They sat, they used whatever convictions that they had to create a template that we call the Constitution, that we've yet to see alive as it relates to every American. But they set a template that set the constructs of the course for this country for many years before us and many years to come. And I've yet to see African Americans as a collective talk about things that are important to them in a way that allows us to push each other forward. So I don't want to pose a question from a question, but I'll say it in a way where we can all think about it. It's very difficult for two owners to pick up the phone and talk about rent rates, to talk about the capacity of owning their next space, not owning the restaurant, but owning the physical property that the restaurant's going to go in, and how that could be profitable or advantageous to us. African American owners are rarely talk about what constructs they want to use as it relates to how we want to train our staff, how we want to develop people, how we want said energy to not just be contained in our spaces, but put back out into our world, into our communities, right? And have an adverse effect on how we do things and how we live. It was difficult when we hit the pandemic to get folk on the phone to talk about how we were going to get payroll protection money, right? That look like me. And these are folk that own restaurants. We get so overwhelmed sometimes by the idea that we're dealing with tragedy or dealing with a circumstance that we box each other out. And so I think really the key point is for our leadership to start to recognize that it is more important for us, right, to communicate with one another and implement change amongst ourselves than it is for us to continue to outreach beyond our collective group.
Thank you. Justin, this question is for you. Someone asked, do we think that for-profit culinary schools have contributed to the issue? CIA, Johnson & Wales, French Culinary Institute. You are a person who has gone to one of the most prestigious schools. Do you feel the culture has started there with the education, with the students, and who's coming through the system?
I think you would agree that because you went to the same school, and anyone else who went to a school, I think it's evolving because, now the CIA, there's actually more women enrolled in the school, in the student base, than there are men. So there are things that are changing. But from the point of when I first went to CIA, our boy Pat in Louisiana, he was the first person I met. He was the first black face I saw, and we're still friends 20 years later. And I remember being that only black student, in the classroom. And, every black person can attest to this. When you're the only, doesn't matter who you are, but when you're the only black person in the classroom, when people get comfortable, they start to come with you with those dumbass questions. And, you smile because they expect you to act a certain way or say something. But in the back of your head, I'm like, well, how come you didn't ask that person that question? Why are you only asking me? And, when black people do, why does it have to be when black person? Because I'm the only black person standing in the class, and I've had that for 2 years at CIA. But I'm just very comfortable in my own skin. And I can tell you to, flip off in a professional term, or I can just smile and say, this is how we do things, and this is how our culture does things, and how does your culture do it, and be PC about it. And I would say, does the school harbor that kind of environment? I don't know, because there was a French chef that went off on me. I don't know if you remember Koyak. He went off on me one time, and I thought it was because I was the only black guy in class. But then when I talked to other black students, because we all sat at the same table in the hall where we ate, they all were like, when Koyak does that to you, that means he likes you. And then when JJ talked me into going back to CIA to get our business degree, I saw Koyak every day in the hallways. He always spoke to me, remembered me, held candid conversations with me, and I thought the guy didn't even like me. So it's kind of hard to say if that environment is bred through school or that old French European way, because that's how our school is portrayed. But I felt it more from the students than I felt it from the chefs or the administration. And I still have great relationship with the administration, but I always felt when I was the only black guy in that class, they made me feel that way, not the chefs.
Omar, question for you. As you've been doing pop-ups through the industry, so it's a twofold question for you. You worked in some of the best kitchens in New York City. Why haven't we seen you at the helm? And the second question is, looking at your website and Googling you, we see that your food is at the fine dining level. Are people being able to reimagine African American food to be fine dining versus European ideas?
I mean, one reason why I started Honeysuckle was so that I could personally reimagine that, but not even close to coming from a European lens at all. I use philosophies of so many different things that I study of Black history through literature and art and things like that to create the food that I create, because in a school like CIA, there is no education around what Black people went through to create the food that they created. And so I have to find abstract ways to create what will be fine to me through the eyes of a Black person. And so, I think part of the reason why I'm not at the helm of restaurants in New York, or why I haven't been at the helm of restaurants in New York City, are because of ideas that I have like that. Ideas that I have had that people have used from me and used them for their own personal access to gain access to positions of power who didn't look like me, who had like a lighter shade, so to speak, to be able to capitalize on things that I have. But also, like, I don't consider myself a chef. I never cared about being a chef. I think it's more important to me, especially now that like the idea of chef is such a limiting idea to me. And Honeysuckle's been around for 3 years, and it's been operating at such a high level, and no one's reached out to me. So when you ask me questions about, has anyone put their arm around me and said, hey, this is what you can do, many people have. I read a quote the other day that said something like, Black people are like over-mentored and underinvested in and underfunded. Enrika has amazing ideas. I have amazing ideas. Tahiirah, I'm sure she has amazing ideas. We're looking at like a collective 70, 75 years of just work experience that no one is putting money into. And because people think we need advice. I don't fucking need advice. I need money. I need money. You know what I mean? Like the system that we're working against is one that that just proves in this room alone. Chef Erick worked his ass off to build a restaurant. Chef Justin, I'm not super familiar with your restaurant, but I hear your story. I know where you come from. JJ, I know where you come from. Like you were just speaking to a person, JJ, before us that has probably 10 times the amount of money that all of us have in this fucking room right now. Like we don't need mentorship. We need money. We need resources. We need capital. And I don't think that it starts with seeking out outside of our community. There's power in this room right now. I've been mentored by people who look like us, who I know who could have invested in me. I'm talking to people right now who are reluctant to invest in me because they're Black and they think I'm too Black. You know what I mean? So like, these are the things that we're actually working against, and that's not to blame Black people for our own success, but like Enrika said, there's so many different things in terms of survival and ideas of trust that like conversations like this are fixing and healing, and having them in the public like this, I think, is the best way to go about that. And so, like, I'm not sure if that's answering the two questions that you asked me, but the answers to both those questions are I've been doing the work, and the reason why I'm not in running some other person's restaurant because I've always wanted to run my own. The only reason why I'm not is because people don't trust my concept enough because they're afraid of the backlash. I don't even think that people don't believe in what I'm doing. They're afraid of a public consciousness that won't make them profitable. And that's the existence of a Black body, period, in this country.
Okay, 100%. And if I can piggyback on that, I think that we need to get away from the idea that celebrating diversity is creating equity, because it's not. Equity, equality, and diversity are not the same thing. What we're talking about is equity. You love to be saying, oh, I'm going to bring these Black bodies in, these Black and brown bodies, blah, blah, blah. One, if your system is still racist, it doesn't matter, because you're just bringing more Black and brown bodies into a racist system to be traumatized. Two, if you're not going to put equity into those Black bodies, and that means going back to the foundation of how you got your equity and making sure that they're at the same level, which may be a little bit more than your white counterpart, then we're not having a real conversation. Because mentorship, that's great. But equity is what we're talking about, particularly in this food and beverage space. Because like he said, we're pretty creative. We control the culture. I mean, there's no secret there. We control the culture. We influence everything: food, fashion, music, everything. Black bodies are in this space and we can entertain you to death. But when it comes to paying us for that entertainment and our skills and our creativity, with equity, now we have a problem. So that's a conversation that we need to be having when we're talking about what diversity looks like. That includes equity. If you're not willing to pay and develop the Black guy who you wanted to wash your dishes, then don't talk to me about diversity and you're doing better, blah, blah, blah. No, this is all of us. Like, the facades kill me, and I have a very difficult time dealing with the pandering. Like, I'm sorry, this has happened to you, blah, 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 blah. I didn't know. You knew.
Absolutely.
You knew. Everybody who looked like you was surrounding you. You knew the money you were spending were with the people who looked like you. You knew. Now you're being called out on it, and it's a fad, and it's cool to be anti-racist and, for this couple weeks. But we'll see in the next couple months how these things are going to go. And the main thing that Black people, and I really hope that we stick to this, is accountability. Do not let these people off the hook. All of these people that are making dollars off of their anti-racist practices that they're putting on, the Black squares and all the rest of that she cuss, I can cuss, all the rest of that shit, you hold them accountable, because those days are done. You're either anti-racist or you support racist systems that benefit you, which is, those days are done. So
I'm gonna go with your closing thoughts are equity in the space and not mentoring. Equity is key, right? Equity is key. I'm gonna give everybody 30 seconds. Let's go around. I just want you guys to give closing thoughts. This was a very powerful conversation, and I know everybody has about 30 seconds of closing thoughts. So who would like to go first?
I'll go first. JJ, thanks for the panel. Thank Will too. I think we could all say, listen to him speak. Regardless if we agree or disagree, we say he was very honest. And that's what we always ask for, is honesty. And I liked what everyone had to say on the panel. And it's time for you, to a certain point, you don't need more mentoring. And I think that's where we all are. Even as an owner, I can say, I'm still learning, but I don't need to keep on being mentored. And I like the space that we're creating here. And I think that's where we're growing to. And we got to keep the conversation and not just let it die down in 2 weeks. So I appreciate all of y'all.
Thank you, Justin.
Absolutely.
Who's next?
Next.
I guess I'll dive in. First and foremost, thanks so much, JJ, for the inclusion. Thank you all for the really thoughtful discourse. This was pretty meaningful. I have to agree with Justin. I think as we listen to guys like Guidara and you brought out something that was really important. The guy was striving to be super successful and he was not thinking about anybody else, right? He was only thinking about his own success. And the only reason I think that's so important is because we find ourselves in that space. As we aspire sometimes to do things, we're really thinking about how the hell we're going to get ahead, and many times how the hell we're going to get out. And as we achieve new heights and as we have new opportunities, I think it's really, really important for us to look backwards and think about how we can be more inclusive and how we can share how we got to where we're at.
Thank you.
I'll go next. I'd like to thank JJ and the panel. This has been very cathartic for me in some ways. The biggest thing for me, the takeaway, is being a part of this panel and understanding there are so many levels and there's so many things that leaves room for discussion, and not just discussion, but putting things into action. I think we talk and we have beautiful things to say a lot, and we have beautiful intentions, but when it comes times like now, so what now? Like when this is done, what each of us, what can we do in some way to make sure that this doesn't stay here? And the other part of this, how I love having topics like this to talk about in the hospitality industry. I would love to see us being invited to other panels that don't always center around Black experience and perspective, in that sense, like we are professionals. So if I want to talk about being a pit master, and you're looking for pit masters, I'm included in that because I'm a brilliant pit master, not because you need a Black woman to fill it so it won't look away, because there's too much talent. So I just ask that carries over in all of the stuff, like pick Black people, choose Black folks, indigenous, all of the people, because they're brilliant and you want their expertise. And that's it for me.
Thank you. Omar?
Yeah, thank all y'all. Thank you, JJ, for facilitating this conversation. I think the most important thing I like to take away from this is, like, 2020 continues to be one hell of a year. I've been on several conversations like this, like Enrika has talked about, watching the news and things like that. And the conversations usually center around like why white folks are doing the things that they do, or why they built what they built, and how we all operate and exist within that. And we got to a place in this conversation, especially towards the very end, about like removing that from the topic of what we can do to build our own success. And so from now on, I hope to only be about conversations like that, and I hope that this conversation, especially that part, is the one that we're talking about, and so that we can continue to build. I mean, I appreciate perspectives, but like, if I'm being quite honest, like, I don't really care about white people telling me why they do what white people do. It's just not that important to me. I want to keep talking about us.
Thanks, Omar. Well, my goal today was to bring out a white person to finally step up and say why they're hiding in the closet. No white person has come out yet. Nobody has said a goddamn thing. And I want to thank Will for stepping out and putting himself on the plank. We had an honest conversation, and it led to a very heart-filled, passionate conversation with everybody on the panel today. I hope people can really take away key points and reflect in your kitchen, your restaurants, your dining room, and what you do ethically. Because the only thing we talked about today, what was right and what's wrong. And we are tired of what's wrong in our industry. So I want to thank you all again. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, JJ.
And I really appreciate it. I look forward to getting together in person. I hate this kind of Zoomy thing because I can't interrupt you. So thank you again. And I hope everybody enjoyed what we had to talk about.
Yes.
Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. So if you have any questions, please email awards@jamesbeard.org. I want to thank JJ again for his wonderful moderation. I want to thank Val Inc. PR for coming up with this idea with Chef JJ. I want to thank the Welcome Conference for participating. Please note that this conversation will actually be continuing tomorrow on several platforms. So at 1 o'clock, JJ will be speaking with Chef Areta Itar of Gramercy Tavern on Black Food Folks Instagram Live. And then we'll be continuing this conversation, hopefully with several of our panelists here for the Welcome Conference podcast. I will be hosting in conversation with several of these chefs here about their careers. So thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful night. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Colleen.
Bye-bye.